Almost 4 years later, God of War is finally on the PC, and if your PC is actually powerful enough, and I'm talking about 3090 or something like that, then you can actually play this great game in up to 4K 120 FPS. But what about HDR? Back then I made a video about the PlayStation 4 version and I found that HDR is not the best in this game, to be very honest. Especially HGiG was not to recommend back then. But what about now? Is there any improvement in terms of HDR? Let's find it out. And the very short answer is no, there's no improvement in terms of HDR. It is exactly the same as it was or as it is with the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5 version. But no worries at all. Compared to my old video, I found with the PC version, thanks to my more experience and more gadgets what I'm using right now, I found actually better settings compared to back then. But let's start with something very important. So what I'm going to show you is just relevant for the PC version. I haven't found this issue on the PlayStation 4 or the PlayStation 5 version. When we go to screen calibration and you start the game in SDR, and by the way, if you like to play this game in SDR, I would actually recommend to set this to 35, because I found 35 is much better in terms of contrast compared to 50 on my HGiG. Okay, for SDR 35 in my opinion, but keep something in mind. When you change this setting here in the SDR picture mode, it will also affect the HDR brightness, which is a very bad behavior. Okay, so let me just change this back to 50 and let me activate HDR. This is our HDR picture at the moment, and when we go back and we're reducing this to 0 and we're just enabling HDR again, we have this picture. Okay, so make sure if you like to play in HDR that you actually set the brightness setting in the SDR picture mode to 50, because I found that's the best value to start with HDR. Okay, so let's talk about my recommended HDR settings, and those settings are the same for PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5 and the PC version. There's no difference at all, but I'm still strongly recommend to use dynamic tone mapping on over HGiG, because HGiG is in many cases just way too dark. And I'm not talking about the maximum peak brightness, because maximum peak brightness, dynamic tone mapping on and HGiG is more or less the same. We're talking around 650 to 700 candela. Depends on the object, of course, but there's no difference in terms of the peak brightness. What I'm talking about is the base brightness, and as you can see, there is already in the test picture a very big difference. So enable HDR must be on, of course, if you like to use HDR. And again, keep in mind that the brightness setting from the SDR menu has an impact in the HDR brightness, okay, on the HDR brightness. So make sure this is set to 50. Otherwise, my settings, what I'm going to recommend to you, are not working. Okay, so brightness set to 25, contrast set to 35. This is, in my opinion, the best way to play this game, regardless if you like to play in dynamic tone mapping on or HGiG. The settings are the same. Okay, and I don't know, I'm not quite sure if you watched back then my video 10-11 months ago, and by the way, don't watch it, it's terrible. But back then I actually recommend to use dynamic tone mapping on with the standard setting 50-50, and this was completely wrong. And if you followed my recommendation from back then, brightness set to 50 and contrast set to 50, the game would actually ask your display to output almost 5000 candela. And this is the reason why HDR looks very bad on the HGiG, because for the HGiG that's way too much. This at this very moment is the PlayStation 5 version. Here we got the PC version, and as you can see, it is exactly the same. So in terms of HDR, there's really no difference between PC or PlayStation version. Okay, let's talk about my recommended settings: brightness 25 and contrast 35. In this case, the game would ask your display to output almost 800 candela. And if you think that's a little bit too much for your HGiG, then try the setting brightness 22, contrast 35. In this case, the game is asking for 683 candela, which maybe fits your HGiG a little bit better. And if you have a display that can output a higher maximum peak brightness than my HGiG, then try this setting: brightness 30, contrast 35. In this case, the game is asking your display to output 928 candela. If this is still not enough, then give it a try with brightness 35 and contrast 35, and then we're already talking about 1250 candela. And last but not least, God of War does not support the HDR calibration menu on the PlayStation 4 or the PlayStation 5. That means whatever you set up here in this menu, it has no impact at all in the game. Okay, my friends, that's it for this video. I say thank you very much for watching me, and if you're new to my channel, please leave me a like, subscribe, I would much appreciate it. And now I have to finish here because too much spoiler. Thank you very much. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.